In my opinion, I think Watch Dogs, the first game in the series, is the best one by far. At least it's my personal favourite, and let me know what you think in the comments. But I remember playing it back in early 2022, I'd say, and it was one of the first proper story games I ever played, because at that point I hadn't really played that many. I think I checked out Uncharted 4 and Red Dead 2, but because I wanted to get into them, I played a load, and that was one of the first ones, and it was off to a great start. And of course, since then I've done a review on Watch Dogs 2 and also Legion, but I never went back and did a actual review on the first one, and that's what we're doing today. And the main reason why I do enjoy this game, and it still lives up to this day, is because of the gameplay. And of course, a big part of that gameplay is the hacking side, just how much freedom you have in just how you go about taking down a certain group of enemies, or just going about a mission. Especially for the time in 2014, I feel like there was no other games like it in terms of this gameplay style. It just is really fun to do. It's nothing overly complex, and of course, they added a bit more in Legion and in 2 as well, with different sort of puzzles and hacks, but the basis is still the same sort of thing, and this is the game that started it all. And it's sort of good because, in my opinion, the gunplay, I'm not a huge fan of it. So instead of taking down a group of enemies just with my weapons, and then that becoming a bit repetitive, I can hack them instead and try out different methods, and that just adds a bit more, versatility to it, and just a bit more to do, rather than just, shooting the enemies and that's it. And what is great is that it does upgrade over time, so you have the basic tier 1 skills as you play the game when you first start out, and then as you progress through the story and the world itself, the character of Aiden Pierce can also upgrade as well. So the gameplay just becomes more advanced and more open as you play the game, and that's all done through the skill tree system, which is split up into 4 sections of hacking, driving, combat, and then crafted items. And the crafted items, that sort of falls into hacking, and with the skill points you get given every time you level up and just as you play the game, you then use them to unlock all the different branches. And what I find great is that, of course, you can go about a mission in any way you want, so you can go guns blazing and just shooting everyone, but the best way to go about it is the hacking side, and that goes for all the other games as well, but I just think this game does it the best, and I think they've really tried to focus down on just hacking, whereas the gunplay isn't as advanced, and they sort of worked on that in the other games. And it's just where you find the most fun, just hacking instead of shooting down. And don't get me wrong, the gunplay in this game is pretty good. It's still that satisfying feeling to it, especially if you use all the suppressed guns and stealthily take people down. But even when you're, really brutal with it, and in some cases you sort of are forced to, the animations do look very, aggressive, and it does look like it's hard hitting, and it's not just really basic, but in terms of just how it feels when you are shooting, in some cases it just feels off and not as accurate, and that could be because I was playing on keyboard and mouse, and the main reason for that is just because last time I did it on controller, so I sort of wanted the 2 different sides, and it's definitely a weird feeling on keyboard. Just something about how it locks onto the character and the aim assist, it just feels a bit off, and it just isn't as smooth. It's actually quite clunky for some reason, and let me know what you think if you've played it on keyboard. But like I said, there is good parts of the gunplay as well, and for something that I didn't actually do an awful lot of because I tried to go stealthily, I didn't see it as a massive deal. And then of course there's the driving mechanics as well, which at the time I actually thought felt pretty smooth and good, and then going back 3 years after and comparing it to all the other Ubisoft games and just games in general, it's not awful, it doesn't feel as good as it did or as I thought it did. And I think that's mainly like the turning mechanics. It's very sort of fixed, it isn't very free, it just doesn't feel that natural, and when you are driving in a straight line it doesn't move at all. It's just dead straight. You could carry on, put the acceleration down, and you would go in a direct straight line the entire time, which just isn't that realistic, and I thought it wasn't like that, but for some reason it is. And I think they did change it in the later Watch Dogs, or just the later games in Ubisoft in general, but it's something that I definitely did notice. And then even when turning, it's actually quite difficult. It doesn't feel fun to do, especially for a game where you have a ton of car chases, and that's a big aspect because of course there's a bunch of different stuff you can do in those car chases. It does have that radar on the map where you have to exit it to actually escape the police, and it's huge as well. It takes a long time to escape the police, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't actually have fun doing it. Although the driving mechanics could be a bit smoother, the actual concept of the police chase was fun. And of course there's a ton of different ways you can go about it, so you can use hacking in that with the jam comms, and that is a crafted item. So you craft that and then you use it, and it basically blocks out all the communications with the police, so they don't know where you are. And then of course there's a bunch of different hacks you can do in the world and the environment, and that's another thing I love about the game, the way it implements the environment, whether that be the destruction and how you can basically destroy everything. Not everything, but there's a lot of stuff that is destructible. So when you are in those those car chases, it feels very fun because you're just smashing through everything, and it is like an action movie in a sense. And just the animation in the destruction, it feels very good, especially for a 11-year-old game now, which is mental. Just for the time, I think it was quite ahead of its time in terms of that part. But also the hacking side with the environment, so you can use the traffic lights and implement that and switch them all the time and confuse people. And you can open and shut bridges as well, so it can go up as you drive over it, and again that will block off the police. There's also multiple explosives you can do, so you can explode a water pipe or a gas pipe and actually use that in combat because it does damage the person. And then there's also cranes and lifts that you can put up and down. And then you have the main mission hacks. So a very common one is basically a puzzle. It's a CTOS hack, and you basically flip through a different switch and then make it all line up, and then it unlocks a path. It's fairly straightforward, but I guess it's fun to do. But that is probably the most common one, and it would be cool if they did expand on it a bit more. And again, they sort of did in the other games, but I just feel like there was so much more that could be done in the entire franchise. And it's quite sad that I think they have abandoned it now, and we're definitely not going to get another, even though there's so much opportunity there and potential. And then another one is with the cameras, and you do implement the cameras quite a lot on the CCTV, where you have to switch through it and then basically make it so it's in the line of sight of something that is unlockable, but sometimes that may be blocked and you have to move different objects with the camera, and then you can unlock a path. And that is a big part of the hacking. It's just basically unlocking and opening up different pathways. I do also want to talk about the story of this game, and that's something that I didn't really have huge expectations for, and it's not one of my favourite parts of the game, but I think it is a bit overhated. I hear a lot of people saying it's sort of boring, it's nothing crazy, and it doesn't really serve a purpose. It's mainly the gameplay that is the main aspect, and that is true, but I think it's a pretty good story. Especially compared to Watch Dogs 2 and Legion, where 2 just felt a bit more comedic and fun and light-hearted in a sense. Whereas this, it's definitely a lot deeper. I mean, it focuses on family, and it's just a lot more deeper from the start. And it's going to be hard to talk about it without any spoilers, but it sort of dives into the character of Aiden Pearce and his backstory and in his life, which we didn't really see it at all in Legion or 2. It's just a lot more personal, in my opinion. And I remember really enjoying it the first time, and of course, again, I enjoyed it this time. Of course, I'm not saying it's one of the best. I mean, there's definitely better stories in games. But for Ubisoft and for the amount of hate that it does get, I actually quite enjoyed it, and I don't think it's too bad. I think one of the main criticisms was the actual character of Aiden Pearce and just his personality, which I must admit, it is a bit boring. I mean, I didn't mind him, but because he has this sort of mysterious, character to him, it's very minimal, and he doesn't really offer a lot. But that's just because he doesn't talk a lot, so it sort of is difficult. And I think what it was is that people struggled to connect to him and warm to his character, which I do see, but I think it's more the backstory and what we see at the start of the game that sort of meant for us to relate to him. I did like the whole dynamic of his partner and their son, Jackson and Clara, and the way we sort of go from this whole intense, action-packed mission, and then it cuts back to this whole dynamic of him and his family, and he is very close towards them, and that is sort of what is meant to show this relatability to him. So it's not just this, evil killer that's just going around, ruthless. There is a meaning behind it, and he is in a way doing it for them, and that is what drives him. And that's the best part about the story, really. And then there's the visuals of Watch Dogs, which I only learned this recently, but apparently in the actual trailer for the game, it looks totally different to the actual gameplay. And that was a big criticism for a lot of fans, because it just didn't live up to it, and they technically lied. And then that sort of followed on in all the games where if it is made by Ubisoft, you sort of understand that it isn't going to look exactly like the trailer. And especially playing this game now, you sort of do notice how it is getting old. I mean, there isn't a ton of detail in, let's say, the nature and the trees and just the surrounding area. I mean, the up close detail in the streets where they have, the rubbish and the destructible environments and the people as well. Just the close, surrounding areas look good, but in terms of the actual open world as a whole and what you see in the distance, it isn't that detailed. It's quite simple. But again, it is an 11-year-old game, but just comparing it to some other games at the time, it's definitely not holding up right now. But it's never always about the visuals, and that isn't a reason to not play it. And I think that is where I end my review of Watch Dogs in 2025. And I definitely do recommend it for sure if you haven't played it. And even if you have played it, if you want just a fun game to return to, then sure, because I still enjoyed my second playthrough. But you probably already understand from playing it that it isn't the most groundbreaking game ever. So you sort of have that in mind when you go back to replay it. But for sure, if you haven't played it, then it's definitely still holding up now. As I said, the visuals, maybe not, but just because of how unique this gameplay is, and the way it has so much potential, I just wish they made another game and really went all out with it, but just it hasn't really taken off that well. But I think the first game's fairly underrated, and as I mentioned, the gameplay aspect is a big reason just to play this game alone, and there's not many games like it where you do have this whole hacking system and this open world. But if you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you enjoy it single player and also multiplayer games as well, then that's what this channel does focus on. I have a selection of playlists on a variety of games, so you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to. If you want to support me any further, then you can become a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. And that was Watch Dogs in 2025, and bye bye.